Welcome to Researcher Revealed. This is the podcast where we go behind the name that's on a poster or a paper to get to know a little bit more about that individual, how they got into research, and why research. On today's episode, we have Professor Anna Strömberg, who's joining us from Sweden, and I can't wait. I've been lucky enough to get to know her through the job that I have here in Norway, and she's so inspirational, for me anyway. I hope you all enjoy listening to this episode, and I will see you at the end of the episode to talk about my top takeaways. Thanks so much for listening. Hello, and welcome to the next episode of Researcher Revealed podcast. I'm Dr. Rosalind Austin, and today with me I have Professor Anna Strömberg. Anna, can you just quickly tell everybody who you are and where you're from?
Hello, everyone. I'm Anna Strömberg. I'm a professor of nursing at Linköping University in Sweden. I'm also the Associate Dean for Research and Research Education at the medical faculty, and I am a heart failure nurse specialist at the Linköping University Hospital. So those are my three roles. I do research, and I'm in clinical practice, and I also have a faculty position overseeing our PhD program.
Wow, 3 jobs. I cannot wait to get into that with you. I thought my life was complicated. But before we dive into the juicy bits, I'd just like to do a quick rapid 11 to kind of get to know you a little bit better. And so everybody else out there can get to know you as well. So are you ready for the rapid 11?
I'm ready.
All right. Are you a Windows or Mac user?
I'm a Windows user. I started off as a Mac user a long time ago, and then I made the transition, and now I always struggle a little bit when I have to use a Mac.
Interesting. Got converted from a Mac to a Windows. Very
Yeah.
nice. Tea or coffee?
Oh, definitely tea.
Yay!
I drink a lot of tea every day, but I also drink coffee. So it's not that I'm against coffee, but tea is my favorite.
Perfect. When you're writing, do you prefer to have silence or do you have music or sound in the background?
When I'm writing, I always have silence. But I don't have a problem with being in a noisy place. I can be in a train or in an airport or in the midst of people and do writing, but I do not want music. I love music. I sing in a choir and I listen to music, but not when I'm writing. But I did my thesis when my oldest kids were very small, so I got used to concentrated with people screaming around me. Yeah, so noise is no problem, but I think music, there you want to have like a more active component that you're listening, and then I get a little disturbed when I'm writing.
Okay, nice. I like that. What time of day do you believe you are most productive?
I cannot really say. I work like very early in the morning, and I often have a moment very late at night just before I go to bed where I also can become very productive. So I think it depends a little bit.
Okay.
I'm more of the person that gets inspired, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a certain moment in the day. But my own time is early in the morning and late in the night because the days are filled often with meetings and interaction with other people. So writing is morning, evenings, or weekends.
Nice. I think you're the first person who's actually mentioned that, the need for the inspiration, and that you work around that as well. And I love that because I think it's something I've noticed in how I work. And there are days where I will basically, because my brain's not ready to play, I will do more like administrative tasks or different kind of tasks. But like if I need to write, I have to have that headspace and it has to be right. So yay, I'm not the only one.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, often you don't have the luxury of really choosing when to do what. But I'm this person that often works at best, even if I have like a really short deadline and I really have to produce, then I function very well. Or when I get like really inspired. I can write anytime, but that I'm at my best when I'm either really approaching a deadline, or if I'm very inspired and just feel very much like doing something.
Nice, I love that. Right, what about referencing management system? What is your favorite or most used management system?
I've actually only used EndNote
Oh,
throughout my
okay.
whole career. I think I started off with EndNote 2 or 3 in the 1990s when I was a PhD student. And, I've gone through a lot of different versions. Some of them were not so well functioning together with Word. So I've been angry with EndNote many times, but I've also praised it and loved it many times. So I tried out Mendeley. I think it's Mendeley.
Yeah.
When I worked in the US for a year, because then they had that at the university. But I found it a little hard to learn a new system when you were very used to another one. And that's a little bit how I function as well, that I prefer not to just learn a lot of new systems because it's nice. Some people love that, but I'm more lazy with that respect. If something works for me, I like to stick with that, not lose time on learning new systems.
I wouldn't say that's lazy. I would say that's efficient and possibly something that is it's a positive trait rather than a negative trait.
Yeah, I'm happy to change if I don't like it and if it's not functioning. But if it works, why
Exactly.
change a winning horse?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right. What about when it comes to making graphs, figures, things like that? Do you have a favorite tool for data visualization?
I can't really say that I have a favorite tool because I haven't found my favorite tool.
Okay.
I find it difficult to find good software to use figures, but I think it's probably also comes back to me that I haven't spent enough time to learn them. I do a lot in PowerPoint, and I do also in Excel. I don't like SPSS graphs. Although I haven't really, in the latest versions, I haven't really tried it out so much, or maybe they've improved. But no, I that's something really on my to-do list that I would like to improve to do better
Nice.
graphs. Some
Yeah.
of my PhD students and postdocs and other colleagues are much better, so I sometimes leave that up to them as well to do the
Nice.
graphical abstracts and graphs.
Having I forget which number I'm on now, like, but I have over 20 guests now, and I would say that I was actually genuinely surprised with the amount of researchers who actually say their favorite data visualization tool is other people.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, but I think it's like we actually just recently funded a new PhD course at our faculty on making graphs and making figures and making graphical
Oh,
abstracts. So I think it is really the future to
yeah,
become much better on
yeah,
graphically visualizing your
yeah,
research. And I would definitely say that that's something I encourage my PhD
yeah.
students to learn already from the start. And I like figures. I like to do it. So I think if I
Mm.
would have had a little bit more time, I would definitely like to do it more. But it is a bit time consuming
Yeah,
to learn new things, and you have to try it out a lot. So, but I
yeah,
think there's I mean, it's not always the solution to make things simple, but I think we
yeah,
have also a responsibility to make our science
yeah,
simple for the
yeah,
layman and for
yeah,
other people to quickly get an idea of what we're doing and what our results shows.
yeah. No, I would agree with that. Right. Favorite snack when you're sitting at your desk?
Ah, I usually don't eat when I'm
Oh,
sitting at
well
my
done.
desk.
You're not the only one. Loads of people
I like
say
to eat a
nothing.
lot, but not when I'm working. I
Oh, I
often
wish I.
drink tea and coffee when I'm
Yeah, I'm
working.
trying to convert from snacking to drinking tea or water, so I'm working on it. But
Yeah.
I think through my PhD, the amount of chocolate I ate was obscene.
No, I'm not a snacking person. I love to eat. I like
Mm,
food a lot, and but not snacking. No.
fair enough. When you're planning, so whether that's like a structure of a paper, whether that's a project, whether it's your work life, when you're getting things organized, are you somebody who uses a digital tool or are you a pen and paper person?
I think I'm a whiteboard person.
Ooh,
I love,
oh, you're the
like,
second
give me a
whiteboarder.
whiteboard, and a
Yeah.
lot of my projects and papers have been evolved on a whiteboard. But and
Nice.
I actually was talking to one of my PhD students the other day, and I said, I can draw you how I envision these figures. And then she said, yeah, I have a lot of your drawings on paper and on napkins, and on all kind of paper. So I
That's
think
great.
I'm a whiteboard / pen and paper person. Yeah.
Nice. I love it. Right. What book are you currently reading?
I oh gosh, how can I translate that into
If it's in Swedish,
English?
just say it in
Yeah,
Swedish.
it's called Stacken.
Stacka. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So
Excellent.
it's like
What I
it's
will.
like the ants live in this,
Okay.
like the ant
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
house. Yeah,
Oh, okay, cool.
yeah.
What I'll ask you to do is in an email, just drop me the name and author because I'm kind of compiling a list of what researchers are reading. Just because I love books, so I find that really interesting. Second last question.
And then,
Where,
but I'm always reading more than one book at the time.
ooh, so
So
what's the
then
other
I'm
book?
also, the other one is an historical book that's called 1793. So it's a historical book about Sweden in the 18th century.
Ooh, that sounds fascinating. I love historical books as well. I love them.
Yeah, but
Um,
I think it's genetic because my father always read 3 books at the time. I'm
oh,
not always reading 3 books, but at least often 2 books.
yeah. I tend to do too. I tend to listen to one book and paper version another book. So, where do you tend to work? At home or in an office?
I work everywhere.
You work everywhere.
Yeah,
I love it.
I'm definitely an office person. So if I can choose, I don't work a lot from home, like for full days. I like to be in the university and in the hospital to interact with people and to sit in my office. But in order not to have like super long days, I also like to go home and work a little bit from home. But I can also work in planes and buses and wherever. Yeah. So but I'm not. An office person. I like to. When we had the pandemic, I found it very hard to work from home.
Nice. I love it. I love it. I work everywhere. I think that's brilliant. Right. Last question. Who is a researcher who you admire?
Ooh, that's difficult. It's a lot of people that I've met throughout my career that I
Mhm.
actually admire for a number of reasons,
Mhm.
and for different reasons. And
You
it's
don't
not,
have to pick just one. You can
no,
say
no,
lots of
it's not
people.
necessarily like the big shot researchers. I mean, sometimes you're very impressed with big shots researchers, but I could also be very inspired by junior people and admire them. I think the first person I really admired in academia was Kathy Dracup, who is an emeritus professor from the US. She used to work at UCLA, and then later on she became the dean at UCSF. And she's really a person that was everything I wanted to be. That she was in clinical practice. She was a very good researcher. She was a great mentor. She was like very, very generous always with her knowledge and her compassion and her ideas. She would generously share her grants, proposals, and manuscript drafts. And so she was. But then I have like also like close colleagues like Tini Jarsma and Barbara Regal that I've worked closely with over the years that I also admire a lot for their bright brains and being fun persons. And
I think that's such an important thing to say, and I'm really glad that that came out, is that it's fun as well. That not only are they, great minds and do innovative research and are kind and generous and supportive, and like you said with Professor Kathy Graycup, um, people who've got elements that you aspire to, but I think, you know, also just people that you like
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And
and that are
I'm
fun to
often
work
drawn
with.
to people that are like fun and generous and just nice to be around. And then, of course, if they do great science, then you admire that as well. So, but for example, Tini and I, we have a lot of fun together while working. So she's really an inspiration in my daily life.
Oh, that's lovely. That's so nice. Um, right. Let's dive in now. So take us back to being a heart failure nurse and how that has landed with you being a professor of nursing and being a researcher and leading some incredible and really interesting research around heart failure and digital health.
Yeah, I started in cardiology, and it was really
Mm-hmm.
love at first sight. I
Oh.
really felt was I was so inspired working in cardiology. I thought I was in a great team. I had a
Mm-hmm.
great boss, and that, of course,
Mm-hmm.
uh, was a big advantage. But I also liked the patient population and the physiology, the
Yeah.
pathophysiology, and that it was really a rapidly moving area in terms of clinical achievements, but also in nursing, that you saw a lot of things. When I started off more than 30 years ago as a nurse, it was patient education was very underdeveloped. There were no like shared
Okay.
decision making. That you had a completely different attitude and view on the patients, but everything was kind of on the move.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very inspired by that, and I really wanted to make a difference and to help especially the mostly severe ill cardiac patients, and that was the heart failure patients.
Okay.
And my unit wanted someone to develop the nursing care for heart failure patients, and
Okay.
my colleagues were more interested in the more acute part and
Mm-hmm.
acute MI. So I was one of few that really signed up for the heart failure patients. And then, so I
Okay.
started developing educational interventions
Mm-hmm.
and follow up. In our hospital, I was part of starting up the first nurse-led heart failure clinic in
Mm.
Europe,
Mm.
which focused on education and support and optimization of medication. At that time,
Oh,
there was not
wow.
so much to have
Mm-hmm.
or to prescribe for the patients. So that was kind of where I started off, and so quite quickly I was drawn into this more developmental part of nursing care, along with ordinary clinical practice in CCU and so forth. So I like that project part of my work already from the start. And then quite quickly, that became a quite big interest, both in Sweden, but also in Europe, for our model of care with the nurse-led heart failure clinic. So we were on a mission talking to everyone and describing our model of care. And then we always got the question like, okay, this sounds really great, but is patients less hospitalized? Is survival better? Do you
Okay.
improve quality of life? And we actually had no data on that. And that always was so frustrating that you couldn't pull out a paper and say, yes, this is, an evaluation of our program.
Yeah.
So I tried to persuade a lot of different people to do research on this, people that had a PhD or wanted to have a PhD, but no one was interested. And in the end, the cardiologist that set up the clinic just said that, why don't you do a PhD and just evaluate this? Stop,
Yeah.
nagging everyone else about it. So, and then at that time, my husband was a PhD student. So I thought like, yeah, how hard can it be? But it was actually very hard because I did not even have a bachelor degree in my nursing
Oh,
exam,
wow.
because I had this like old education that was only
Okay.
2 years in university at that time. So I had to start taking a lot of coursework and do a lot of stuff in order to to even enroll in the PhD program. So I had my whole project plan. I had everything set up. I had funding, but it was hard to get into the PhD program.
Because you had to go backwards.
Because I had to go do a lot of courses. And from the beginning, I was a little ignorant. So I thought like, oh my God, why do you have to do all this? Because a lot of the physicians, they just started doing research. But then when I took the courses, I really realized that, I knew nothing about statistics and I know nothing about scientific methods. And I only know the RCT design. And so that really opened the door and my eyes for other types of methods like qualitative methodology and a lot of different things. And I also came across the supervisor later on that also became my nursing supervisor. So that was a good process. Although I was a little like wanted it to happen quickly, and I was So that was kind of my starting point. That I developed something that I believed very strongly in. I saw that the patients benefited. We had no scientific data, and then I just wanted to do it.
It's really interesting. So I can't remember her name, but I logged on to an online webinar and it was an emeritus American professor. I'm gonna have to dig through my paperwork and see if I can find out who it was. And she said something really interesting that I think really connects with your experience. She said that nurses often know how to make patient care better, but they're lacking that evidence. And it was around, like her talk was around trying to increase research capability and capacity within nurses. And she's like, we know it because we see it, we live it, because we spend so much time with those patients, but very few nurses get to a stage or have the training in order to, like you said, like you knew it worked, you'd seen it worked, but when you talk to people, they're like, nah, where's the proof? So for you then, doing that PhD became a way to upskill so that you could gain that proof.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think that in the end, it was also for me, it was a perfect match because I really loved research. I mean, I said like cardiology was love at first sight, but so was also research. I really felt that, this is my right element, and there were so many things that you could do research on. So I think that that's still my problem, that I have so many ideas, but I don't have time to put everything into projects.
When you say research was love at first sight, what was it, do you think, that appealed to you? What is it about research that makes it so appealing to you?
No, but I think the whole like research process, that you set up something systematically and you have a question and you have a systematic approach to how you solve that, but also a lot of problem solving down the road. And I think that also is something that I like. I never believe things cannot be done. I think it's like it always has to be a solution to things. So I think that's also a good thing to like when you're in clinical research, that you try out a number of various way of doing things, of recruiting or retention in studies, like molding out a new intervention. So I think that's those were things that I really saw that I liked and still like to do. So yeah. But
Nice.
then, of course, then I'm also a very persistent person, so I don't give up easily. And that I think also, and I can do a lot of. I don't say I enjoy it, but I can endure doing a lot of hard work before you really cash in the reward.
Yeah, it's that whole, I think that's something that research, you definitely have to have a big bucket full of persistence, but patience as well, because it's that long-term satisfaction rather than that instant satisfaction. Okay, so you embarked on your PhD. It was challenging. So through your PhD, were you then able to collect the evidence to demonstrate that your new nursing model and having nurse-led heart failure clinics being effective?
Yeah. So that was like the main result of my PhD. And our results were, on one hand, a little surprising because the study
Okay.
was not designed to look at effects on mortality, but we saw mortality effects.
Oh,
We
wow.
did not see effects on hospitalization alone. Our primary endpoint was the combined endpoint of hospitalization and death, but our endpoint was actually driven by death. So we had a significant difference in the combined endpoint and in survival. But we only looked at a little over 100 patients. So of course it was really a small study, but at that time it gained quite a lot of attention. And the interesting thing is that now, a few years back, we looked in our registry data, the Swedish Heart Failure Registry, and there we have data on whether you have a follow-up in the nurse-led heart failure clinic and or not. And there we saw exactly the same results in 40,000 patients that you
Just
improve
being that
survival.
key
Yeah.
component being that nurse-led heart failure education with a patient.
Yeah. And optimization of treatment and
Yeah.
making sure the diagnosis is right. And I think it's like really a package of components that makes nurse-led heart failure clinics successful. And I don't think it's like, even I'm a nurse, I also don't think it's like it's not like the nurse that really is not replaceable, because if there's a physician that have the same skills as a nurse in terms of providing support, providing education, having patients in up titration of medication, seeing the patient on a regular basis, I think it works the same. And so I think it's not that I think the nurse-led part is to show that this is something that really that nurses are well fitted to do.
Yeah.
But I think, and it's really also about a team with physicians and physiotherapists and dietitians when needed that are around the patient. But it is often the nurse that leads this kind of
coordinator.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so storm and success, get the PhD finished, and now you've got 3 jobs, one of which means that you're still doing loads of really cool research, but also professor of nursing. So fast forward a little bit. How have you landed where you are?
I think already when I was a PhD student, I said to my boss, also before I started my PhD, I don't want to leave clinical practice. My goal is not to be a teacher in the nursing school. My goal is still to be an expert nurse. And then my boss at that time, both the nursing boss and the head of the department of cardiology, was very supportive, and they said, "Of course not. We support your PhD. We want to keep you in practice." So I envisioned myself as in this role already from the start, being a research leader in the future, and also still keeping practice. And I think it's yeah.
Pause for a second. Was that because of Kathy and you'd seen her do it, or was that something that came from inside of you?
I think it mainly came from inside, or it definitely came from inside myself. Kathy was a role model, and alongside with a lot of actually other American colleagues, because they were far ahead of us, at least in Sweden, in terms of being able to combine research and clinical practice. But I think it was very much within myself, and also with the support of the head of the nurses at my unit at that time, who was also very supportive of nursing development and nursing research. And so she was very encouraging, but it was really something I kind of knew what I wanted for myself. Yeah.
I like that. Okay, so you'd seen it and you wanted to make it happen, and you're holding down 3 jobs now. So I'm assuming, do you feel you've achieved that goal?
Yeah, I think I think I've been very fortunate throughout my career to have been able to try a lot of various positions. I've been head of the. Later on, I went into a combined academic and hospital position, and I've been head of the nursing department. That was very a very difficult and demanding task, which I had for 8 years. But I'm really happy that I did try out that leader role as well. But I also felt happy the day I closed that door. I also felt that I don't want to, you know, always be climbing up the ladder of different kind of leadership and administrative positions. But I don't mind trying new things and doing them in between. Although it might be sometimes struggling to combine it with the research, with the goal of having like a strong research group and being able to apply for funding and writing good publications and doing good projects. So I think that's yeah, it's always this balance, and I must say I'm probably often on the outer border, what's like healthy for doing a great job in all three parts. But I also see that there are some synergy effects that you are in more than one role as well. But
That's
I think that I
interesting.
think it's, for me, it's been good to go in and out between these roles, because I was a visiting professor, for example, for 1.5 years in the US. 1 year on full time and then 1.5 year on part time. So that was also to try out only research for a while and in an international setting. So for me, it's been fun to do different things throughout my career, not to do same.
So your role as a clinic, like what the term everybody uses is this clinical academic. So you work clinically, you have some university related roles, whether it's leadership or teaching or whatever, and you have this research component as well, where you're leading a research group producing research. So for you, that kind of ebbed and flowed throughout your career depending on opportunities and what you went. So there were phases where you went 100% academic, and then phases where you were leadership and things like that.
Well, I've the only part of my life when I was like 100% academic was when I was in US doing this visiting professor. Otherwise, I've always had the clinical role, and around for the last, I would say, 15, 20 years, it's been 1 day a week. So that's and early in my career, it was a higher percentage. And the leadership roles, and now the role when I'm working with overseeing clinical research and PhD, the PhD program at the medical faculty, that is also a time limited role. So you sign up for 3 years. And now I've done 3 years, and now I'm in my second 3 years period. So I think these that is an advantage for me. That's been an advantage. Kind of you say that, okay, I'll do 3 years, you give it 100%, and then you can move on and either leave the administration role for a while. That I've also had periods when I had no administrative role at all, only research and clinic. So I think that has worked for me. And I think that now I have this quite demanding administrative role, but I don't see myself forever in that. So I think that would be probably a good idea to have a period where you have more research later on. So I think that's always been my goal, to go a little bit in and out of these positions.
So I have to ask, because this idea of a clinical academic role has been in the UK, it's been talked about since about 2008, 2009. Australia gave it a try and they kind of have abandoned it because they felt like it didn't really work. America, like you say, seemed to have it working to some extent. How have you made it work?
Well, I think it's definitely not. It always takes more than one person to tango. So I've been very dependent on having good leaders, good heads of both the nursing part and the department part in the hospital and in the university, that you have leadership that are encouraging you to take on this role and have an understanding that your work situation has to be somewhat adapted to manage. And but when you make it work and you have the good leadership, you that really appreciate that there are advantages for both sides. And I think that the Department of Cardiology in the hospital, they definitely see that I bring a lot to the table there, on top of just being a heart failure nurse. And I think also the university acknowledge that I'm a role model, showing others that you can have this kind of position, and this is one solution how you do it. For example, the 80-20 position. But I think in terms of if you also have to decide on where is your main focus. Is it like you are a clinician doing some research, or you are a research leader doing some clinical work? So I think that's also, and that's like my dream scenario, that you would have both these sides, those that are really the clinical experts, but also doing research or are involved in research, but also the research leaders that have their part-time clinical position to stay on top of things in practice and interact with colleagues and being models. So I think that's I think that's one key, and to look at the clinical part then, that you can't do everything. You can't be in CCU and in an outpatient clinic and have administrative positions in the hospital. So you have to like carve out one specific role for yourself. And for myself, it's been the heart failure clinic, and that's very much also been my research. So there you could really see I'm doing my studies in the same place where I'm also seeing my patients. And
so there's a real synergy there, but
I think so, yeah,
a real need, because one of the things in the UK that I've started to see is there's some institutions who are starting to write job descriptions for clinical academics. And you read the job description, and you're like, for one person? Because it's like you say, they're like, you're supposed to be this phenomenal leader, this amazing educator, this leader and autonomous clinical practitioner. And then you also need to be running international and national research. And it's just like, so it can feel very overwhelming. So it's very interesting to hear that there in Sweden, at least where you're based and with the leadership that you have supporting you, you've been able to narrow it down to a more specific role. And while that might fluctuate depending on what role you're in at that moment in time, but you've tried to keep it a bit more focused so that you're able to do those things really, really well.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, so I think that's really, and I think it's really, you need this collaboration and this awareness of the leaders on both, in both organizations, that you have a vision together, what this person is going to do in both organizations. And I think this goes for any clinical academic, if it's a physio or if it's a physician. I think everyone's struggling, and it becomes very difficult when the leaders on both sides in both organizations are not communicating or not having the same picture or view of what's what's possible for this person to deliver. So, but I must say I've been lucky, and I think I've also been maybe quite clear on what I want and how it should be done. And it's also a give and take, because I often work one period during the summer, one vacation period during the summer, in 100% in the clinic. And then, of course, that's very beneficial. When a lot of academics take off for 7-8 weeks, I do my 4 weeks in the hospital. But for me, it's also an opportunity to be really focused on the clinic, and and then later on in the year, when it's more busy in the university, and maybe I teach in a PhD course, or I do other stuff. So then there are some weeks that I won't be in the clinic, and of course that is that is a model that works for our clinic, and also that my boss there feel it's like a win-win situation. So I think that those are the kind of maybe scenarios that you have to find for each individual. What's beneficial for the organization, but also what's beneficial and works for the individual.
No, that's really, really helpful advice, I think, to lots of people who are out there listening, trying to be what you're managing to be, is to get those leaders together to hit their both value points, and you find a way to negotiate between the two, so that that hospital is like, oh, in Swedish summer when all the nurses want time off, if we get you, woohoo, kind of thing, you know, that then helps them see value at the point of things that are important for them to deliver. So like that safe care with good expertise and all that other things, but also being able to reinforce the well-being of staff who are full-timers and need to have that time away. So yeah, that's really interesting. I've not heard somebody explain it quite like that before. It's just hit a different note in my head.
Yeah, and I think that our clinic's been very successful in keeping nurses with a PhD in clinical practice. And I know also in a few other university hospitals in Sweden as well, it's been, especially in the Department of Cardiology, I must say, it's been leadership that's been in the forefront of really seeing how to carve out this role for nurses to be clinical academics. I'm not saying that everyone is like super happy in their role and that there's like no problems, because of course it is, but it's also, I think it's like always a challenge to be a full-time academic as well. And I think this balance that a lot of nurse academics have between teaching and research is the same that you have between research and clinic. So I think those that maybe have the biggest challenge is that those that do a lot of both teaching, clinic and research, because then you have a lot of scheduled time as well. So because that I feel also now when you have the administrative part, it's your days are very filled. So
so that's, and I think that goes back to what I was saying, like me reading job descriptions, it just feels like they're looking for a superhero, not a human.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, that being clear, that finding things that you're able to deliver and deliver well on, so that then that leadership can be like, she did bring value, he or she did bring value, they are doing those things that they set out to be, rather than being like, I can bring a horde of unicorns in and we'll solve all the world's problems, which is how some job descriptions read, and you're kind of going like,
No, and I think I think the best thing is just to be honest and critical and say, like, I can deliver this, but this one I'm very skeptical to. You know, how have you thought about that? Because sometimes you feel like a job description is more like a wish list than really something feasible for an individual to achieve. So I think that's like, it's, I mean, we also have to be like strong and speak up for ourselves that, you know, this is not going to be possible to deliver in combination with these other things that I envision that I will be doing. So
that's how you did it, in that you had the collaboration of leaders from both your institutions, you made it manageable, you spoke up for yourself, so you're doing it. So I'm gonna flip the coin a little bit. What would you say, and we'll start with the not so pretty, what would you say have been some of the biggest challenges that you've faced being a clinical academic nurse researcher?
No, I think one of the biggest things are to make it all work together, like the combination of your daily schedule, that you quite often feel that you should have been in two places at the same time. And I feel that I have very supportive clinical colleagues, for example, that take care of my patients when I'm not there, if they call in at the telephone hour. So I think it also has to you have to have colleagues where you feel like they feel it's okay that you're not there, and that they will take over some things, and they feel that you can bring other things to the table that can help them. But I think that's definitely the most challenging thing. Another thing that was like not so much anymore, but in the beginning was very challenging for me, was that I used to be this, it sounds strange to say super nurse, but you are a really expert nurse. Everyone comes to you, ask, you know everything. When something is new, you're on top of everything. And then you kind of feel like, these skills are fading away. Of course, you are getting other skills as a researcher or as a teacher, but that was like the picture, my own picture of myself, or like my own, how I envision myself to function as a nurse. That was a little bit challenging in the beginning. That you felt like I could, on one hand, be happy about that I was like gaining a lot of new skills as a researcher, but I also felt a bit sad that I was not as good as I was on some things as a nurse. Then, of course, you have to see that, well, now I know all these, I read all these papers, I have all this knowledge that I did not have before. But there's also, nursing is also a lot about like hands-on skills, and yeah. So I think that is also something that you have to endure, and that you have to also make sure that you're a safe nurse, that you're not risky to the patients with not knowing enough about different things, because it's also a lot of technology and a lot of skills that you have to be on top of. So I think that is also something to be aware of. How does it feel for you when you're you're changing your roles a little bit, and when do you, sometimes you maybe have to, now I have to stop doing this because it's like too demanding, or this is too much, or so and that's when I talk to other academic researchers that stop being in or clinical academics, when they stop being in practice, it's often that they feel they're not safe anymore. And that could go for both physicians and nurses and physios, that they feel they don't have enough hours to be on top of things.
That's, I don't think I've ever heard anybody say that before. That's really powerful. Thank you for sharing that. How did you come to terms with that shifting? Like you said, like going from that nurse on the ward that everybody was like, "Oh, Anna, can you help me with?" to, now in the role that you have. I know, like, I'll be the first one in the line to admit it. You have like early career researchers and PhD students still coming to you and being like, but that question has changed. Rather than it being about that hands-on nursing skill, it's about a research skill or something like that. Like, what were things that you used in yourself to help yourself get through that transition, other than just enduring?
Yeah, I think to be honest with yourself, like to acknowledge the feelings you had, and try to analyze why do I feel like this, but also to be honest about what I could do and what I could not do. And I think that also what comes back a little bit to this job description, that you're honest and say like, okay, I don't feel comfortable in doing this, but these other things are fine. And I think that as long as, if you have like a good academic career that I've been fortunate to have, then you also feel like, I'm thriving in other areas, and you can't be on top of everything. It's like, you don't need to be that. And I think that I also felt that, you trade something to get something else, and that's fine, because, and then I still feel so happy to keep the nursing role, because it's really so much in my DNA. And when I see patients and I feel that I can instantly help them, which is not the case when you do research. You work hard for 5 years, and then you have a publication, or you get like a product. So I think that as long when you come to term to that, and you feel like your own expectations on yourself, like, I can expect these things on myself as a professor, I can expect other things than before on myself as a nurse, then that was a good way for me to cope with that.
I
And
love
also to be impressed by your other colleagues that were better than yourself, and acknowledge that.
I think that's brilliant. I never thought about that before, that like that hands-on nursing, because like I've been challenging myself around these sorts of thoughts, which is why I think I'm finding this conversation so interesting, is that it's like, what is it about that patient interaction that is so valuable to a nurse?
Mm.
And I think, exactly what you said, you get that very fast feedback loop. That loop is quite short, because whether it's because they're really unwell and you're able to give them that medication that stops their pain, that helps get the fluid off, that whatever, you do something, or whether it's you're holding their hand and just being there with them. Like there's lots of things that you can do, and you then see their numbers improve, their pain improve, their, emotions improve, their knowledge improve. You see all of those things, but then you also get that, most times, I'd say than not, that real like thank you and that relationship with the patient as well. And it's like you said, it's that clinical side is much more that fast feedback loop and gratification and satisfaction, where research, it's like 5 years later you get your paper published and a bit of a this, and then everybody's like, well, what are you going to do next? There's
Yeah.
not as much of that instantaneous, that really faster feedback loop.
Yeah. No, and I also feel like being in clinical practice definitely makes me a better researcher, because it's not, of course, like if you see one patient, it's more like anecdotal that what this person needs, but you have a clear view of what's going on, what does patients say, what's happening in practice. So it is much easier also for me, I think, to sharpen my research questions and my how I design interventions, and also to see what will later on work. It won't be possible to collect data like this in a clinic, in a busy clinic, or it won't be able to. I could never persuade my colleagues to go through all this before. And so I think these are also, and to think with people that are in practice, what if we would do this study? How would it work for you? So I think that really being in practice, I think it really makes me a better researcher, and helps me a lot in sharpening my thinking, and kind of seeing what needs to be done. And I think especially now, when you're more at the later stage of your research career and you're looking back, you also get, or at least I know many people are now, but I was not that interested in the beginning, like on implementation, that you feel like you're not done until you really put this into practice, if it was an effective intervention. And there, if you look at timelines, it's like horrible that it takes like 70 years before something is implemented in clinical practice. And there, I think you can also influence more if you're still around, and you can influence at least your own unit to change practice, and then that might lead to. So I think that both to get an insight in what kind of research is needed now, and then of course in combination with all the literature you read, going to conferences, discussing with I mean, that's also very, very, of course, important, but also then the little flavor of really seeing, like, is this applicable also to what I see in practice? And I think that's sometimes the missing link in nursing research, that it gets like a little artificial, if I should say it like in a nasty way, that you really feel like, really, is this the most important research questions for us to respond to right now? I think that's a risk if you lose. And I mean, I'm not saying that you have to be in practice in order to be in contact with clinical practice, but I think that's like something we should really be aware of, that we need to have more collaboration, we need to have more connections with clinical practice in order to do the right things.
I totally agree with you, and in my very short career so far, I've really seen that, and a lot of papers and stuff that you read is starting to really And I think it's one of the reasons why in the UK anyway, like our National Institute for Health and Care Research, which is sort of like a government body who funds both research projects, fellowships, development, and things like that. They've really started to throw quite a lot of investment around developing more non-medic researchers to be clinical academics, because they believe that one, you get better questions, but they've also started to talk about faster implementation. So that was going to be my next question, is in your role, because you've managed this clinical academic thing before, well, at least in the UK, before clinical academic is a thing, being a clinical academic being a thing, you had it in mind, you wanted to make it, and you've made it happen. Have you seen examples in your own career where, because of that that bridge that you create between those worlds, having things that you've been involved in get implemented quicker in your local hospital?
Yeah, I think definitely, and I think also nationally, actually, because when we started up nurse-led heart failure clinics, we really spread it very quickly. I mean, to almost up to 80% of all the hospitals,
Oh, wow.
just by showing the model and showing the evidence. So. And we also started working with computer-based education in the late 1990s, when it was like very novel, and that was also possible to implement quite rapidly, because we knew people and we could come there and show them the data, and we could show them the computer program. So I think definitely if you're known in your field, and if you're trusted, and if you have connections, and if you have some influence in your own workplace, but also on a national level. I've always been involved also in national groups for heart failure care and so forth, and writing guidelines. And so I think those are also important components if you want to change practice, that you really try to get into these organizations that change practice, and also say yes to travel to up to the north in Sweden if you're invited. So I think these are important things to go around, to meet clinicians and to be active. But I definitely think you can influence in your own workplace a lot. If you're there. And not only your own research, but also other research that you come across and see that this is really something we want to try. But also to be critical, like now we're discussing a lot in our heart failure clinic after the STRONG study, where we up-titrate all 4 heart failure medications very rapidly. And we believe that this is really should be our goal, but we also see if you have a more person-centered approach, this doesn't work for everyone that has like renal failure or so forth. So I think there we have a good and critical discussions, like this is the evidence, how are we going to implement it? Well, we're going to take like these ideas, but we also know from our clinical practice that this will not work for everyone. So we're going to do it slightly different, and this is going to be our model. So I think that is also something that we're constantly discussing. And then what I can bring to the table is the evidence. So I can show the studies, and then my colleagues can also be critical and say, well, fair enough, but have you thought about if so and so comes here, and then I would not do that. I would do this instead.
So it's a real, like, the more you share your experience with me, the more like it just fills me with hope.
Oh,
And I
that's
don't
great.
say that lightly, because I think like, depending on where you are and what hospital you're in and the connections that you have, and the experience of those leaders around research and clinical academia and things like that, and it's like you said, whether it's fortune, whether it's whatever, and it doesn't necessarily mean they are a bad leader because they don't believe in clinical academics. It's just, it's something that is different. It's challenging and it challenges the status quo. So to hear that in a place where those right people are around, you were the right person to embed the role, you've demonstrated the power of the role, but now, you know, you're actually talking it like my dream job of being able to be that person who is like both creating research and implementing your own research, delivering big national studies, but then helping to ensure at the end of that study it gets translated, even if that does require some degree of adaptation because of that real worldness. Like and I mean I've seen it happen loads, where, you know, like you say, the big study comes out. So Paradigm study came out, and hooray, we've found a magical thing. And the doctor started giving it out like candy to anybody who had heart failure. And my brain was going, do you know how hard it was to find people who were eligible for that study as a research nurse? Because we were the ones who were screening them, who were saying whether or not they were eligible and not eligible. And we screened hundreds and hundreds of people to not find very many for whom they fit that criteria. To then, just because it gets approved and there's this real promise of this great improvement in outcomes, then it was being given to people who went outside of that. And I'm not saying that was the wrong thing to do, but to me, in my evidence-based brain, I'm just going, we should be capturing this, we should be testing it, because that wasn't the original purpose. It's been adapted because of the promise, because of the real world applications of it. And there's a whole body of research around real world applications of medicines and things like that. But to have a position where you can be a part of that conversation and guide that and to make that happen just sounds very exciting.
Yeah, and I think you're really spot on there that you know, research is very controlled, especially pharmaceutical trials, that it's not for everyone to be included. And that means that we don't know later on when we enroll it or roll it out at large, how would it work? I mean,
Yeah.
if you have renal failure, or if you have hypertension, or if you have multimorbidities and are demented.
Yeah.
So I think that's of course like the clinical interpretation that helps out
Yeah.
if you're both knowledgeable about the science, but also how real clinical
But
practice works. And I think
but
that has been like the role of a lot of clinicians. They've had that possibility, like physicians, to have that um, ability to interpret like what works. But in nursing, we've kind of lacked that bridge that comes from the research into practice and finds out together with practice like what would work and what is needed for us.
yeah, and exactly. And that, I think that's why, like, for me, listening to you, I'm like, yay, because it's kind of like, well, it's like those things, and it's I think like having these conversations, and yes, the podcast becomes like the conduit that is encouraging me to have this. It is just because I think sometimes, you know, when you're doing research, depending on your center and how big or small your research group is, it can feel a bit like you're the only kid in the choir. But the reality is that there are other people in there. So hearing your story has been very, very encouraging for me. So thank you very much for sharing it. I just looked at the time and it has flown by. I don't know if I'm going to need to like try and get longer podcasts or things, because I feel like I could talk to you forever. For all aspiring clinical academics, or even nurses who are interested, maybe not in becoming a professor like you are or doing a PhD, what would be your top tips about any nurse looking to try and embed research into their practice?
I think my first tip would be to find a mentor.
Mhm.
find someone to discuss with. What do you want, and what are the different opportunities on depending on where you are. Like I shared with you before, I was on a very low level academically starting off, because the level of the nursing education when I studied was like much lower than today. So I had to start take it from there. But I think that's like a good start, to just start from what are the opportunities. I mean, am I interested in doing a master? Am I interested in becoming involved in researcher as a research assistant? Do I more want to develop practice and learn how to interpret research? So I think that's like knowing what you want, and that might help thinking with someone who's a mentor, because that's how I see my role, and I know several of my colleagues that also have a PhD and still in practice. They also see that role. So I think that's like a good start, to have a mentor. And I think the next step is to see, am I in the right workplace to make this happen? Is there do I have leaders that are innovative and see the opportunities for nursing to develop, and that would give me opportunities or time or new tasks to develop. So I think, and otherwise, you might want to think about moving into another workplace where you can get what you're after. So I think that being in the right place work-wise, having a mentor, those are probably my two top tips for being successful in this area.
Very good tips. Very good tips. Thank you so much for giving your time, for sharing your experience with us. I will, for everybody out there listening, just like I normally do, there'll be an episode description, whether it's on YouTube or on a podcast. And in there, we'll list a little bit more about Anna, how you can follow her on social media, some of the research that she's doing, and the books that she's reading, those sorts of things, so that you can look into it. But yeah, thank you so much, Anna. Any last words before we wrap it up?
No, I just want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to have this conversation. This is something I'm very passionate about, both research in order to improve the lives of patients with cardiovascular disease, but also encouraging my colleague nurses in various places to take chances of developing their own careers, even depending on if it's like in academia or if it's in being more the best nurse you can be. I really think we have a great profession, and I also think that we have a great future to develop our profession. But there you need to work together, academia and practice.
Oh, I have nothing more to add. With that, I'm going to sign off, because that was brilliantly said. I'm definitely going to steal that clip. It was brilliant. Thank you so much, Anna. And I will see everybody next episode in another 3 weeks. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you, Rosalind.
Don't go away. Up next, we have the top 3 takeaways from this week's podcast by Dr. Rosalind Austin. Anna's story was so inspirational. There was so much about it that I wasn't expecting. And so much I'm grateful that she really shared with us. I'm definitely going to be listening to this again, not just because I'll be editing, but also because there's just so much packed in there. It was really hard for me to pick a top 3 takeaways, but I've managed to do it. Have no fear. So, top takeaway number 1 is that her desire to be involved in research came from her observations as a clinical nurse, that this thing that she was doing, this new model of care, this rollout of a nurse-led heart failure clinic that incorporated education, was making an impact. And it turned out through her PhD that that impact was bigger than what even she had kind of thought it was. But in order for her to be able to share that idea, to have that idea make impact, she recognized that she needed that evidence, both numbers and other pieces of evidence as well. And that was kind of what fueled her. And I think in general, not just nurses, but a lot of healthcare professionals, we put ourselves down around not thinking that the work that we do is recognized or is valuable or has that research paper. And for her, that was what drove her into research. It wasn't exposure to research as being a research nurse or anything like that. It was actually she had this belief from her clinical observations, and she wanted to create the evidence for that. So that's what she did. And I think that's so inspirational. So yeah, top takeaway from my conversation with her is around be that person to be brave enough to step forward, to collect the evidence, to be able to prove what the value and the importance that your project, your practice, your whatever is having on those patients. I think that's really valuable takeaway. Second top takeaway was around the fact that she just fell in love with it. And I think again, and it goes with one of her answers to her question in Rapid 11, that she wants to work with people that are fun. And I think that just speaks to who she is, both as a person, but also as a researcher. She wants to enjoy the things that she does. She wants to work, yes. And, she said many times about the challenges and the need to endure and the need for persistence in the research world. But ultimately, regardless of those challenges, regardless of how hard it may be some days, that research on its own is something that she's got a great passion and great love for. And I really enjoyed that. Third takeaway for me was her delving into what her career has looked like and how she had successfully managed to negotiate a role as a clinical academic for her. And although that shifted through the years and what percentage she was doing what in, whether it was administrative, teaching, clinical, or research, those major components tended to shift a bit. To me, I think the biggest takeaways around how she managed to do it and the success around it was her recognition that it's a team sport. That being a successful clinical academic who's spread across multiple organizations, yes, it means supportive leaders, so team member number one. Two, you as the person doing the wide variety of work. But she also mentioned, and it kind of slipped under the radar possibly a bit, is those colleagues who are around you, whether they're your academic colleagues, your research colleagues, or your clinical colleagues, or your administrative colleagues, is their support as well, and understanding all of those different things that you might be juggling and those different priorities that you might have to deal with in certain times of the year, and how through her ability to stand up for herself, to rein the people who were hiring her in when they presented her with a dream job list of being like, not so much that, but okay, this was a real message, both of hope, but also just glimmer of somebody who's been there, who's walked it, who's lived that reality, being like, actually, this is how it worked for me in my organization. Not trying to say that that's how it would work for everybody, but this is how it would work. This is how I made it work for me. And for her, that was around getting the right team around her to support both facilitating within a leadership role of the existence and cooperation between those institutions, her and her ability to juggle and do all of those things at a level of expertise that was warranted and needed those positions. And then third, the people that she works with. And without those three things, for her, it wasn't successful. And while I've heard iterations of that, it tends to more be on the focus of the leadership and the leadership being supportive and the leaders from one institution to the other institution talking to each other. But very rarely do your colleagues come into it as well, or you come into it. So I think her way of thinking about it was really refreshing and something that I really valued. So yeah, top takeaway number 3, becoming a clinical academic is a team sport. Right, that is everything for this episode. I hope you're enjoying it. If you have any questions, do drop them on the YouTube comment section. It's just the easiest way to make sure that I see them and then I forward them on. As always, there'll be a detailed episode description on both the YouTube and the podcasting platform of your choice, and that will have lots of details around Anna, where she works, how to find out more about her, read some of her research, the book that she's reading, all of those details will all be in the description. And if you could, give us a like on YouTube, follow us on your podcasting platform of choice. It will really help grow the channel. It is growing. It's nice and steadily getting a little bit bigger and a little bit more widespread, which is really fun to see. And I'm very, very grateful for all of the positive feedback that I've had from you guys. If you made it to the end, thumbs up. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see and speak to you all in another 3 weeks. Thanks so much, and remember to stay curious.